we talked about following agile practices, and the second thing is investing in collaboration tools. Now, this day and age where everyone is working remotely, make sure you spend some money to have good web camera, good headset, good microphones, and then make sure you use collaboration tools like Slack, then Microsoft Teams or Skype or Zoom, and make sure that is not a bottleneck for your team to work together. That is something as a leader you really want to constantly keep thinking about. Trust me, investing in collaboration tools is really going to help build high-performing teams. The next thing when it comes to effective communication is encouraging socialization. So what I usually do when I'm managing my teams is I have virtual happy hours every Friday, so that people, like, they come on a Zoom meeting and then they give more insights into their life. Like, they show their dogs, their kids, we drink beer, we talk about life. And that is a setting which you really want to have, because work shouldn't always be about, okay, business, task. Sometimes you also need to get personal with your team. That's why having virtual happy hours really help. And if possible, if you're in the same vicinity and closer to your team, yeah, you could meet them in person from time to time, take them out for lunch, and increase their communication. Another thing which I remember talking about encouraging socialization is what one of my friends does. So he's a CIO of a startup company here in the Bay Area, and every time he gets on the Zoom meeting, he asks his team 3 questions, right? First one is, he asks, how are you doing today? Second thing he asks is, what is something you're happy about today? Third thing is, what is one thing you're looking forward to this week? And he spends the first 5 to 10 minutes just talking about that with all of his team members, and that really brings the human connection as well. So, effective communication is the first piece you want to work on, and the things I mentioned comes under the umbrella of effective communication. The second thing you want to do is empower your teams. So I believe in empowering leadership, and that's my style of leadership, where I'm super clear on what is expected from each person. So I set goals, expectations, and deadlines, and then motivate the person, develop the person, and then let the person run the show while I'm in the background supporting them and then checking in with them and making sure they're getting all the necessary resources to perform their job better. I think that's how work should be, and that's a type of leadership which is really going to help motivate your team as well. So empowering leadership is something I'm really focused on, right? And talking about empowering teams, here are some strategies which I've followed, which have worked wonders for my team. First thing is, make sure you have one-on-one meetings with your team. It's so important, because only in a one-on-one setting, a lot of people actually open up and they talk about, okay, what are they really going through, whether they're liking their job, what are some obstacles they're facing. Those are some things you really want to focus on during your one-on-one conversations. The next thing I used to do, talking about empowering teams, is have rotating responsibilities. So every sprint, usually they're 2-week sprints, and every sprint I used to rotate responsibilities of people. So if there's a tester, I would ask him or her to be a scrum master for a sprint. And if there's a developer, I would ask him or her to be a tester for a sprint. And of course, we plan the tasks accordingly as well, because we carve out some time for the other person to shadow the actual person, to get insights into what their life looks like on a daily basis. In that way, a lot of things happen. One is, people get insights into another person's job. Second thing is, they figure out different interest areas, and they get more empathy when they see a tester doing their work, or when a tester sees a developer doing their work, or the developer sees a scrum master doing their work, right? And that is something which really helps to increase transparency and then get new ideas within the team. Another thing I used to do was peer coaching. This is the thing, folks. Say you have a team of 10 members. instead of looking for training elsewhere, you already know that there are a lot of strengths within your own team itself. For example, a developer would be really good in Android development, and a tester would like to learn Android development. So why don't you just pair up the developer with the tester and let the tester learn from the strengths of the developer? So what I used to do is, I call it peer coaching or buddy coaching, where I'll assign people based on their interest areas with one another, and they learn from each other. This could be during lunch, this could be after work, or you carve 1 hour time every week just for buddy coaching sessions, and that really helps to empower your team. So that's the second thing, empowering teams. The third thing to make you a great leader is effective feedback loops. Feedback is really, really important because you need to know how you're doing from a strength perspective and from improvement areas as well. So here are some ways you can set up effective feedback loops as a leader. First thing is you could give proactive feedback and reactive feedback. So what do I mean by that? Proactive feedback is when, say for example, a person is one of your direct reports is going to give a presentation in a meeting. You can proactively tell that person saying, hey, I know you like to go into data quite a bit, but in this crowd, we have business folks, so talk more about the impact to the customer. So now you're proactively telling your direct report, giving him or her feedback so that they can actually act based on your feedback. So that is proactive feedback. Then you have reactive feedback. Reactive feedback is when a person does something and then you immediately give feedback. So say for example, let's take the same use case. The person gives a presentation and then he focuses a lot on data. Then you get out of the meeting and say, hey Raj, could I talk to you for a second? So take the person to a corner where there's no one else and say, first of all, great job on the presentation. It was really good. But some of the things you could improve next time is if it's an audience of business folks, then you probably want to focus more on the business impact rather than just focusing on the data, because that's what they relate to. So that is a reactive feedback. You are reacting to something which happened and then you're giving feedback. So that is something you want to keep in mind. Proactive feedback versus reactive feedback. We already talked about one-on-one meetings. That is a great way to...
And there are two ways in which you can Hello all, I am Sujit Sukumaran and I welcome you all to my atomic talk on this topic, AWS for testing top 3 use cases. Before going into the use cases part, let's look at this important question called, is AWS something meant for quality? given the learning curve and the vast scope of AWS, is it really worthwhile to go for us to explore and learn AWS? The answer is a strong yes. There are three reasons why I say this. Number one, we are seeing a increased adoption of cloud from private cloud to public to hybrid to multi-cloud. We are seeing a lot of things happening in that particular space, and also we are seeing a lot of cloud native applications being built. At this point, it makes very logical step for us to understand how a cloud ecosystem works. The other reason is that when we are learning cloud, we also learn about other things as well, importantly about how a system generally works. We learn about the performance of a system, the scalability, the availability of it, what is the failover mechanism like, what is the resiliency of the system. So that really makes our whole perspective of quality a little broader. Rather than just focusing on the testing aspect, we think about a lot of other aspects as well. That really helps. And the third part is that AWS itself supports a lot of testing use cases. So once you are into AWS, you can easily spot different services and different solutions which are provided by AWS to help different testing use cases. So that's also a great advantage you get once you understand or learn AWS. Now, going into the use cases part. The number one thing is how we can make use of AWS for mobile and web testing. So we have a service called AWS Device Farm, which is a testing service which we can make use for testing our Android, iOS applications and web applications. The important thing is that you get an opportunity to test on an array of actual, real physical devices when it comes to Device Farm. There are two ways in which you can particularly do the mobile testing using Device Farm. You can do automated testing. So if you already have automated testing frameworks or scripts already with you using AppM or Calabash or XCTest or whatever it could be, you can upload those scripts into Device Farm and also your application, which is an APK file or IPA file, and then you can do automated tests using Device Farm. But imagine you don't have any kind of automated scripts already developed. In that case, Device Farm helps you with running its own first tests or exploratory tests on your uploaded application. So that's how you can perform automated tests using Device Farm. But if you want a more kind of a manual way of testing on different devices within AWS, then you can do that also using this particular option called the remote access. This is how you can particularly make use of Device Farm. Let's go into the console and see how it generally works. So this is a mobile device testing project I created some time back. Let's go in here, and you have this option of automated test and remote access. Let's go with the automated option. So I'm going to come here, and there is a 5-step process involved wherein you can create a run. So I already had a APK file uploaded, so I'm making use of that one. That is step number 1. The next step is to actually decide what is your kind of testing you're going to do, like what framework are you going to do, what kind of tests are you going to execute here. So since I don't have any kind of automated tests, I'm going with the first test. In the third step, you need to choose on which all devices you're going to test. You can either go with the top devices AWS themselves present to you, or if you want to create from a device pool, you can choose from different OS versions. Since this is Android showing only Android devices, you can select what is your OS choice, what's the form factor you require, and accordingly you can customize your device list here. So I'm going with the top devices option here. Going to the next fourth step of this process, wherein if you want to have some additional softwares, or if you want to set Wi-Fi particular state, or if you want to select some location or locale, if you want to do any of these customization, you can do that as well. And finally, go for the run. So it takes some time to run and show the results. Let's wait a bit. Now the execution is complete, and you can see all the 3 tests passed on all the 3 devices. If you click open any of those, you can see a video of what are the tests run, and also if you want to get the screenshots, that's also available here. And additionally, you can get all the logs for different tests already run. So that's how device farm work. And when it comes to the pricing, you have different price options to choose from. You can pay for a particular device minute if you want to do that, or if you want to have more flexibility around the underlying devices, then you can select a device slot and pay for the whole slot per month. When it comes to desktop browsers, you pay for every instance minute you run. The second use case which I want to talk about AWS today for testing is the distributed load testing. So DLT is a kind of a solution which is already built by AWS to support load testing and made available to us. Underlying, they make use of Taurus as the open source framework for load testing, and it's also making use of different AWS services, and it packages everything together as a load testing API and makes it available for us as a ready to launch CloudFormation template. So it takes just few minutes to launch the whole application and the whole infrastructure. So you can readily launch it and you get a web UI console. Therein you can upload your JMeter or any of your load test scripts there, and you can decide what is the number of threads you want to execute, what's the ramp up time, on all those kind of things. So again, let's go to the console and see it. So this is the DLT solution page. Here you can come and you can click on this option called launch in AWS console. You can create the stack from here. So the stack creation is fully completed, and you get a CloudFront URL exposed. That is this web console, UI console. Here you can come to create tests, and you can decide what kind of test you want to run here. So I'm going with JMeter. I'm uploading a JMX script here. Keeping my thread number of users as 50, and maybe concurrency as 10, ramp up time 2 minutes, go for 1 minute, and let's run this. Now the load test run is complete, and it took almost like 10 minutes to simulate 50 users, and you get to see like how is the test results looking like, what is the average response time, what's the percentile response time, what's the average latency, connection time, how has been the errors, all these kind of things. You get to see the results here on this same dashboard. So that's how you can very easily, without having the difficulties of setting up some infrastructure, you can very easily come and execute your load tests on AWS. Now we can come back and delete this whole infrastructure so that we don't incur additional charges. And the third solution which I want to tell today to you is all about like how we can do resiliency tests on AWS. The traditional testing is aimed to cover or uncover the known issues or known problems within the system. But what about the actual production? It's quite unpredictable. A lot of unknowns are there. How can we easily identify those kind of hidden areas, or how can we understand the boundaries of our system? That's what you get to achieve by doing chaos engineering tests. So chaos engineering as a practice is kind of cross-domain discipline. There is testing involved, there is DevOps, there is SRE elements involved. So if you want to do chaos engineering tests, you have a service called Fault Injection Simulator. So what happens in this one is like you make some assumptions or hypotheses about your production behavior. Say like this is my maximum CPU utilization. Like if the CPU utilization or memory consumption goes beyond this particular limit, this is how I expect my system to behave. So you can validate your assumptions. You can make clarity about how your assumptions is really going to work in the production by injecting purposeful faults or kind of chaos into your production. So as you can understand from this particular image, you have certain experiment templates already defined for you by AWS. So these are all typical kind of failure solutions or failure templates you get in AWS ecosystem, which means like you have suddenly your DB coming down, or your whole availability zone coming down, or you have a certain amount of latency or memory utilization happening on your resources. So these are all experiment templates made available for you. If you want to design your own templates, that's also possible. So with using these templates, you can inject chaos into your
చేయాలి ఇల్లుకి వచ్చారా రైట్లు ఎత్తే ఉత్తగత్తే నువ్వు ఉన్న కూర్చున్నప్పుడు వేసుకో పని చేసినప్పుడు కాదా పని చేసినప్పుడు వేసుకో
అదేంటి నీళ్ళు చల్లనీళ్ళు పోసుకో సెట్ అయింది కరెంట్ బిల్ తగ్గుద్ది అంటే అట్లా కూడా కరెంట్ బిల్ ఫుల్ వస్తుంది
వేసుకోరా కూర్చుని మంచిగా వంట వేసుకో అని అట్టప్పుడు వేసుకొని పోతే అట్టే కాబట్టి
అదే ఇప్పుడు ఇదంతా వేడికాలం కదా చల్లి లేదు వేడి లేదు చల్లి పోసుకో కరెంట్ బిల్ కూడా తగ్గుద్ది రోజు వేడి కదా సంవత్సరం నీళ్ళు ఎగదాలకు పద్ధతి ఉంటుంది. ముందు ముఖాలు ఆడుతూ ఎట్లా పడుతుంది మళ్ళీ నీళ్ళు.
So when that alarm level is reached, your experiments get stopped automatically. So by doing this kind of an exercise, you get to understand the boundaries of your system. And if you feel like those things are really good, then you can be really confident about your system, about your big release days and all. But if you feel like those things has to be, there is a scope for improvement, you need certain improvements to be made to your infrastructure, then you can make adjustments accordingly. So that's how you achieve resiliency tests. You perform resiliency tests to understand the performance, the scalability, the limitations of your system. That's the third use case which I want to talk about today. So I have included all these additional resources, the links, everything available here. And also I'll be here around to answer any of your questions if you're interested. Have fun enjoying the rest of the talks at TestFlix 2022. Thank you so much.
Hi, welcome to my talk, Thinking of Quality as Developer Productivity Tool. My name is Priyanka Halder. I am doing quality engineering for last 15 years. I currently work for a company called Oscar Health. It's a full stack insurance company, health tech insurance company. I also own my own consulting firm called the Lean Starter, and I help Series A companies to think about quality very differently. So let's come to our topic today. How can we think about quality as developer productivity tool, right? So how many of us have heard this cliche points where people say, oh, QA is a blocker, QA slows down releases, quality is QA team's responsibility. Why there is bug on production? I think 100% of us have heard this somewhere or the other in our career, right? And why does this happen? Because we are wired to think that QE is a separate process, it's a separate org, it comes and slows down the release process, we don't need it anymore sometimes, or how can we automate 100% of our checks so that we don't need exploratory testing anymore? But can we break that myth and can we make QE as part of our development team? Let's think through that in this talk. So let's talk about some reality. Though we hear those cliche points that QA is a blocker or QA is a slows down releases, at least I have seen in my career, a lot of the companies that I have worked in the past, they have started the whole quality engineering process very late in their life cycle, maybe after years. So when they were small, 10, 15, people, they had ad hoc processes, and they were just going with unit testing. But later on, when they become big or they started growing really fast, they found, okay, they are not able to achieve any quality software at productions, and it becoming difficult to make sure that all the microservices work or all architecture has a wholesome quality, right? And 5 out of the 6 companies or have seen like critical issues in productions. Like every company has outages. Like one day before I'm recording this, LinkedIn had a very big outage where they were completely down for 1 hour, right? A big company like that, when they go out, so that points out that this is normal. Like we will have outages, but how can we minimize that, right? So can we position ourselves little differently than we have done it for ages, right? Can we make ourselves as a tool that gonna enhance developer productivity and not gonna decrease them and not gonna make them frustrated or not gonna slow them down? Okay, how can we be the developer's friend and make this process of quality engineering easy, predictable, and fun? Let's talk through that. So if we have to position ourselves as developer productivity enhancer, I think we have to take 4 strategies. What are those? So be a quality coach, not a quality engineer. Don't own it, but train the team such a way that they would love to do that work within a predictable manner. So to predict it, you have to find the data, right? So support your newer processes and newer kind of practices with data. Standardize those processes. So if you think of 300 people doing a whole SDLC where if they are reading requirements, developing their tool, adding unit testing, if you can make the quality part also very predictable, like after they add unit testing, they have to go through a standard test planning, and they have to make sure that the happy path is working 100%. They have to run certain automation tests. So if you standardize the process, it becomes fun to repeat it and not be confused like what we are doing. And then provide the tooling so that they are not spending a lot of time exploring the cases, rather than they are just maybe able to achieve it with a touch of a button. Sometimes it will be possible, sometimes it won't be, but let's see how we can do that. Let's discuss each of these points in little details. So let's talk about be a QE coach, right? So whenever you are establishing a quality process, can we ask what is missing? So if that company existed for years, definitely they are doing something right. So highlight that, what they're doing right, and highlight where you could bring the missing pieces. For example, suppose it's a backend team and they create API endpoints, but you see only unit testing and they do not have an established process of running API testing, maybe other than running it manual way, right, without automation. So can you introduce them to some tooling like Postman, or create a unit or API testing framework that gonna help them establish a quality in a more structured way, right? How can you benchmark them with industry standard, and then can you help them mature? Again, same questions, like if they're today only doing unit testing, help them with some tooling that they're gonna use, and now they will, every time they write an endpoint, they will make sure they're checking 400, 500, 200, 403, all those various things, and it will be a boilerplate for them. How can you make it easy? Can you create processes and tooling that is very much repeatable and predictable, and they do not have to go digging every time they're developing it? And also, one of the biggest point that I have learned is positioning ourselves as a developer productivity enhancer is that do not own the test execution, but train the team how they can execute it faster, right? If the question is, okay, one QA serializes the releases and it increases our release time. How can you not own it, but you can make sure that you are providing everything that the developer can run themselves, and they can own, and they can be the owner of their own quality. So to do that, we have to first make sure that we are supporting our processes with data, right? Do not try to boil ocean. I have seen in many cases when people start thinking about the newer quality processes, they try to test everything. So suddenly the developers are perplexed, like why we have so many bugs in our system, why we have to fix all those. So to answer those whys, help them and club them with real data. So maybe you have a very big e-commerce website, but not all features are important, right? So support them with analytics, that how can you make sure the top 20 most visited pages are supported, right? Have no, almost zero to none happy path bugs. How can you make sure the top 20 used features are always have 100% availability? You can do that with automations, right? Also make sure that you are testing the right browser. So if your user not using IE, you do not have to find bugs on IE or fix bugs on IE, an example, right? And there will be some features which are critical but might not have volume and you cannot support it with data, but with product you can work it out, and you can make sure, for example, reset password. We don't want to see a lot of volume on reset password, but it's a very critical feature if your e-commerce site has a login for it, right? So always support with data. Then standard, repeatable and easy processes. So baseline maturity, tell them like how they can have a predictable way of quality engineering. For very big organizations which are governed by government, right, health tech or finance, you have to have test case documentation, because there are authority which audit these organizations, and you have to prove that okay, certain test cases you have run before you have went to production. For that example, for those kind of example, you have to have a test management tool. But if you are a startup, you are just starting on, you can maybe have a mind map, but have an established process and predictable process and easy process, which is like not too much of a burden for the development team. Help them with test plans. So can you make it a process of your SDLC that when a product gives you a requirement, you go ahead and you publish the test plan before developer develops it. So you are achieving the test driven development, right? Already developer knows what kind of bugs can come, so happy path bug can be mitigated, and there will be no back and forth of filing a bug or fixing a bug. So we save time, we save productivity, we save frustration. So it has worked beautifully in my career when we publish test plan a lot earlier and make them developer the owner. It works beautifully. And then figure out like how you can again enhance the productivity by thinking about accessibility, thinking about browser coverage, giving input on security testing, giving input on performance and load testing. So it's not about only making sure the features are working, right? How can you make sure that we are one team and we are making sure that whatever developers are developing are making to production with all these points in mind? And second to last is quality tooling, right? So if you already establish your repeatable process, now figure out small wins where you can provide tooling to make it more easy. For example, again, if you are a big company and you have to have a test management tool, how can you integrate it with your ticketing system like Jira, so that developer doesn't have to leave Jira to read the test cases and can do it inside Jira, right? The integration part of it. How can you choose the tooling where developers are not afraid to use it and can adopt it very easily? Like I have seen for ages, developer would not like to work out of Selenium framework because they feel like they're going to break someone else's test and it will be a lot of work to debug and fix it. So can you think about a tooling or design your framework such a way that you separate out the framework part from the test case and make the developer owner of the test case so that they can easily add, record, and not be afraid of breaking the framework, right? And then another example comes to my mind is measure the unit test. So a lot of companies always have like starts with unit test, but they don't know how effective that unit test is. So bring it that measure of unit test process, maybe through SonarQube or other tooling, internal tooling, where it says that, okay, in any time unit of code is written, the unit test has to be 90%. And if you're not achieving that, that means you do not have enough testing. And it has increased developer productivity a lot. Then add API contract testing. So once you have established a certain process, think deeper through the test pyramid. And can you make it a process that, okay, if it is a backend team and they are creating API endpoints, they will always have a boilerplate where they will check through 400, 200, 500 and make sure it's working as expected. Also, if it is a very big microservices architecture, can you make sure they're establishing contract between each services and making it backward compatible and not breaking that contract, right? And once you have done establishing this QA tooling, I'm 200% confident that the developer productivity will enhance and not decrease, and they won't be frustrated because these are super easy way to make sure they are producing quality work. The last one is, once you are done establishing this process, track it with metrics. Adora metrics are very popular these days. So can you monthly publish a quality report where you can say how, with all these processes, you have reduced happy path bugs, you have reduced incident, you have reduced MTTR. So if you have this easy repeatable process, we should be able to go to production and reduce the mean time to release very significantly, and it will showcase that how much you have achieved through this. So thank you. I hope with this point you will be able to make your developers happy and more productive. And thank you for listening to my talk. Bye.
My name is Huibschot, and today I want to talk about how to not waste time. There are many, many ways to waste time in software development or specifically in testing. This presentation is to inspire you to start looking for waste in your work and get rid of it. So not knowing what's valuable is one of the most important problems that I see. There's no common understanding, there's no true or deep understanding of the product that we're testing. So what is important and where are the risks? And not knowing that will end up in testing unimportant stuff or even the wrong stuff. So start asking questions, because I see many testers sit in refinements, making notes and listening, but not actively participating. Or sometimes even they're not invited. So get your ass in that meeting and start asking questions. Do risk analysis, do a thorough risk analysis. Talk about where do you think problems might occur and map them, model them. So it prevents you from testing the wrong things. And keeping an overview of a product like a mind map or diagrams or even a list might help you talk about the things that you think are important. Talk to the product owner, the business analyst, the end users, like, hey, this is my overview, what do you think? And report about it. And with reporting, I don't mean writing a report, but talking about your overview and say, hey, I have been working on this risk analysis or model of the product, and can you have a look at it? Can we discuss it? Collecting feedback. And of course, if you test stuff and you find bugs and nobody will care, so nobody's fixing the bugs you're not, then you're testing the wrong parts of the product. So talk about why bugs aren't fixed and find out. Creating insight in the product is one, but creating insight in the testing you're planning to do is also very important. So create a test strategy. And for me, a test strategy is a mental model of the things that you want to test. It's what you want to test and how you want to test it. It's the model that guides your testing. And it gives you missions for testing. So think about, why am I testing this? Is this important, or is this risky, or do we want to make sure that it works? And what aspects of the product are important here, and how am I going to test them? So you can prevent stuff from being tested twice, like in unit test, and then you test it while testing the user story, and maybe even the users tested in the acceptance test. So it's tested 3 times, or testing stuff on the wrong level. And with that I mean, I'm not a big fan of the testing pyramid, but it gives you some insight that the base of the pyramid is the biggest part. So make your testing, discuss your testing with developers, and make sure that you can do testing on the lowest level possible. If you can do stuff via the API, test it via the API, enter your data via the API if possible, and also discuss testability. I think it's the magic word in modern testing. It's testability. And people don't talk about testability a lot. So ask for testability, discuss testability with your team, with your developers. How can I make my testing easier by having logging, or making getting help by collecting data to do testing, stuff like that. Talk about how testing is done and how you can make it faster and easier. Testers almost always test too much, and that's how we think. We're risk averse. We really want to make sure that we find all the important problems. But are you doing too much? Talk about your testing with your product owner, or your business analyst, or management. And I have an awesome story about a tester that needed to do regression testing. She made a plan for it and some test cases, and she created an overview, and then she started talking to the product manager, and the product manager said, well wait, this is way too much. If you can skip these parts, and maybe you can do a little bit less there. And she cut her work down from 3 to 1 week. And that is because we as testers don't often have insight in what's really important to the business. So start talking about it. Do you have too many variants of your test cases, or are you over-engineering your testing? So writing down all the steps in detail, collecting all the information, because just in case you just get sick and other people need to take over your work, or if you find some problem in 6 months in production and you want to prove that you have tested it, well, those situations don't occur very often, do they? So do you seriously want to over-engineer testing? What do you actually need to do good testing? And we talked about risk analysis and prioritization in an earlier stage. So do it. Talk about it. Make sure that you know what's important and what might be problematic. Testing is all about learning. So make sure that your learning is effective. And I see a lot of ineffective learning, where people just keep on running all day and just keep doing stuff instead of just slowing yourself down and do a wrap-up of your work. After a half day of testing, just sit back, look at your notes, look at your test cases, look at the things you wrote down, and hey, do I fully understand? Am I done? Or do a debrief with somebody else. Talk about the work. So it's sharing information, but also you might have some feedback on your work. And that's the next one. Yeah, feedback often. So if you're writing a document, just go to somebody and say, hey, can you look at it, and am I on the wrong track? Don't wait until you're done. Do retrospect a lot, to reflect a lot. Just now and then, each week, each month, each sprint, each year, take time to think about what am I doing and what can I learn? Talk with other testers, talk with other teams. How are you doing your work? Ask for help on a regular basis. If you ask for help, people tend to be willing to help you. But I see a lot of people are afraid to ask for help, or my colleagues are so busy, I don't want to disturb them. I will find out myself, and then you're wasting time. Share your knowledge. Ask other people to share their knowledge. Don't test shitty software. Stuff that doesn't work at all or is bad. It's full of bugs. Logging bugs will take a lot of time. It will take valuable time away from you covering the product. So insist that developers do good unit tests. Insist that you get working environments with the right data and the right connections. Don't do all the thinking yourself. Your brain is overloaded with the complexity of your product and doing the right testing itself already. So start using heuristics to help your brain think of the right stuff. Start using checklists so that you can just check off, like, what am I doing? Where am I in the process? It really helps. Also, pair with other people, or maybe do some work with your whole team at the same time. If it's testing, it's called ensemble testing. Instead of wasting time, you'll probably learn a lot. Be picky on what you do together, and make sure that you learn to effectively work together. But pairing and ensemble testing is really powerful. Much time on it. Don't try to be exact, because you will never be exact. You don't know what you will encounter. Make sure that you don't spend too much time on finding why is something a bug. Find help and do the analysis together. Of course, you need to spend some time, but don't overdo it. Also, spend a bit more time on creating a decent bug report, so that the people you send it to actually know what you're meaning and you're done wasting their time. Get rid of stuff you don't use. I know it's really hard and you spend a lot of time on it, but hey, you're not using it again. Get rid of it. And stop making all kinds of documentation and screen prints to prove that what you've done. That's called ass coverage. Spend your time testing, creating product coverage. Bad automation is also a thing. Don't try to automate everything. You can't. Stop writing brittle automation. If you're in a situation where you have brittle automation, go fix it. Find people that can help you, so that you don't have to rerun tests and they're failing all the time because of just minor details. If you're a skilled programmer, awesome, do it. But if you're an unskilled person, maybe you shouldn't do that work, or you should get some help or guidance or coaching to get better at it. Look at the tools you're using. Are you using them because your company makes you use them, or are you using them because they actually help you? Also, mocking too much or too little can be a problem. Automating the wrong things just because you can. Automation is not part of your daily routine. With that I mean, if you have automated checks, run them daily, check the outcomes. And if you're not doing that, or they're not part of a pipeline, why do you have them in the first place? And then brain waste. Your brain is the most precious tool you have. Take care of it. Don't get interrupted. Focus. Make sure that you get into the flow. Don't test if you're just tired or you're distracted by things that are happening in your life. Make sure you're in the right mental state and get enough rest. Rest really, our brain really needs rest. And meetings, we have a lot of meetings, unnecessary meetings with no goals, meetings with just the wrong people or too many people coming in unprepared, poor facilitation, or we're starting late, or we don't take any decisions or actions. Stop doing bad meetings. So what are the solutions? Well, turn it around. Know what is risky and valuable, Create a test strategy. Stop
ఉండాలి
testing too
ఏమవుతుంది
much. Discuss what you're actually
నీకేమవుతుంది
testing and what's important. Create a culture
ఏమైనా
of
వేసుకోండి
learning.
నీకెందుకు ఇది చేస్తావు
Collaborate.
మరే
Learn how to test effectively. Learn how to do good automation. Get some experts helping you get off the hamster wheel and get some rest. It's all about testability. So, some tips on testability. Go find this book by Ash Winter and Rob Meany, Team Guide to Software Testability, or find the Heuristic for Software Testability by James Bach. They will help you create insight in how to do effective testing, how to improve your testability. Okay, stop wasting time. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Joshan Manigantan and I'm going to be talking about choosing a mobile test automation framework. So a bit of context. So with test automation for mobile specifically, there are a few different types of frameworks, as I said. So the most famous one being Appium. There's the native ones, which is Espresso and XUI tests. And recently for React Native apps, there's a new one called Detox. Everything addresses a different problem. And I'm going to be talking about what solves, what doesn't solve, and which one would fit you in a given scenario. So as I said, I'll be speaking based on my past experiences. So it's mostly about how I felt about the tools. How I actually address this talk is by basically testing one feature in all of these four frameworks. So this following talk is about how each and every framework differ in my experience of testing that particular feature and what was the challenges that I faced during this. So let's get started and see what the feature is. The feature is pretty much trying to test this list and see if I can find an element in there. So trying to keep it simple. This example that you're seeing is from Detox. So you can see that when I run the Detox script, it would actually run the test and it would actually scroll to a particular element I wanted to find and make sure that that element is present there. So you can see that the test coming through and you can see the screens popping up and it will scroll you to a particular element and it will make sure that the element is present. So you can see here that it was able to scroll and it was able to reach that particular element in there. Let's start with the experience that I had with Appium testing this exact same feature. It's a quick context on what Appium is. It's an open source tool. People who work with Selenium would find this pretty similar. And it's really easy shift to go from Selenium to Appium because it pretty much follows the same standards and everything. So where does Appium fit? So where can one expect to use Appium? So when you're new to test automation in mobile or in general, Appium is a good way to get entry because it supports multiple languages. There's a really good community around it. And as I said, there's different types of languages it supports. It tests from a black box view, so you don't need to understand too much about how Android works or iOS works. It's just pretty much a test automation framework which will help you test both. And you don't need a lot of support for this one because Appium has a lot of tools that can get you started and a lot of documentation how you can get started easily. So there's not a lot of dev support that you might need to work with the framework because all you need is an output file that's the developers can provide you either via the CI or manually, and then you can use that file to actually go and write your test scripts on top of. So in terms of getting started with Appium, this one is for the Appium server. So you have an Appium server running locally, and
From there, you can just write a test, either in any of the languages that you like. So this one is a JavaScript test. You can say which Android device that you want to test or iOS device you want to test, and you can pretty much start writing your tests in there. So it's as easy as it sounds. There's a lot of community support around it as well, and a lot of tools support Appium-based scripts to run in the device farms and things like that. So what can't Appium do then? So as I said, Appium is more of a black box testing because it tests from a user's perspective. It doesn't know a lot about what's happening within your code. So it's quite hard to pass in test data to a test scripts because say for example, if you want to open up a screen and have custom test data in there. So things like that cannot be done with Appium, whereas you can use other tools, native tools to do that. So if you want to test different scenarios, say for example, pass, fail, error screens and things like that, it will be harder to do it because you can't manipulate your screens as much. So you need to actually replicate the scenarios by either having proxies running or finding a way to do that. So setup can be harder, especially on the CI because of the signings and all that. So if you're quite new to it and trying to set up a pipeline, it might be quite challenging. But now there are quite a few tools that you can use when it comes to CI, like Bitrise, which have a lot of support for Appium, but it still is a bit of a learning curve in that. If you have a very vast test suite where it runs for quite a bit of time and it tests different scenarios, Appium might struggle to do a little bit because what Appium does is it calls the native tools and with native tools actually does it. So there's a performance lag there. So if you're much concerned about performance, you might need to have an eye on that and see if it's actually causing an issue for you. And Appium's code sits separately. It's not part of the code base that the developers work on. So it's just kind of a separate thing. So it feels isolated and there's no way to actually know when changes happen in the UI and things like that. So that's something to be aware of as well. So in terms of both collaboration and maintenance, this can seem a little bit isolated. So sometimes you might have to write the same test in two different platforms. So sometimes you can't just have the same UI in both Android and iOS. So in those cases, you might have to write the test twice. Even though in Appium, you can write one test and make it run in both platforms. That might not always be the case. Cool. So let's jump into one of the native test frameworks and see what we can, what the experience was writing the same test. So XUI test. So XUI testing is an iOS and a macOS framework. So it comes out of the box. There's nothing new to install. This one pretty much takes care of the iOS side of things. But you can't use the same thing to run Android because this is specifically built for iOS by Apple. So the scenario you'll be using this in is where you expect a bit more with UI testing. You want to be more performant. You want to write more different scenarios and you're a bit more involved in the code. So that's when you can use XUI tests. So and this is a skill set requirement as well. You can't use any language. It has to be either Swift or Objective-C. So mostly Swift. And it's native testing solution for iOS, as I mentioned. So specifically for iOS, built by Apple, it comes out of the box in code. And in terms of support, you kind of get a lot of support from the devs because they're actually working in the same repository, in the same code base. So they might be able to help you with it in terms of reusing the unit testing stuff that they've built already or things like that. So you can have helper functions that can sit both in UI and unit testing frameworks. So that's a good add-on. So what does it look like to write a test? So if you look at this example, you didn't have any additional libraries or anything. You can just jump in and write a test for it. There's not much that you need to do here. Once you understand the language a little bit and you understand the setup a little bit, then things will become easier. So given the native solution it is, we'll check what can't XUI tests do. So as I said, it's more native to iOS and macOS. So it's not for Android. You can't use it in a cross-functional setup. And there's a learning curve for Swift. And then there's also context switching between iOS and Android because you most likely are going to be working on the Android version as well. So you can't be writing tests in just one platform. you might have to do it, and again using a different platform for Android. So concepts like hermetic testing can work, but you'll need buy-in and support from devs. So hermetic testing, to be a very bit short, is testing within the scope of your app itself. So as I was talking about in the Appium section, where you can't manipulate some scenarios in Appium, here, because you have control over the code, you can pretty much pass in test data of any kind, or you can set up error scenarios to happen within your test itself. So you can have a lot of scenarios tested within the context of XUI tests, but they might need a little bit of refactoring that needs to happen in the way that the code has been built, so it's easy to pass in the test data and replicate some error scenarios. So that's what hermetic testing means, and it's very much possible in native testing, but you need some support from the developers and the teams to understand that you need to build the code in a way it's much more testable. It's a good add-on to have testability as one of the aspects, but there's a little bit of work that has to be done around it. So that's XUI test for you. Now let's jump in and see what the Android version of a native test would look like. So that's called Espresso. So according to the Android website, use Espresso UI, concise, beautiful, and reliable Android UI test. So let's see if it actually is more reliable and concise. The scenario that you would be expected to use Espresso is, as I said, for a more native testing scenario where you want a little bit more about unit testing, you want it to be more performant. You need to pass in test data and have hermetic testing and all that kind of stuff. And skill set wise, you will need either Java or Kotlin. Again, as I said, if you want to go on the native route, you might want to learn Swift for iOS, and you might need to have Java or Kotlin in one of these in your tool sets as well. And it's also native testing solution for Android. And you don't expect a lot of dev support because it's pretty straightforward in terms of how to get started. And yeah, there's a lot of tutorials around where you can pretty much go and start writing your tests on your own. So it's pretty similar to Appium because if you're coming from that Java mindset, it might be easy for you to get adopted. It will be much more easier than learning XUI tests as well. So what does it look like in terms of getting started? Again, as similarly, because this comes out of the box, there's nothing that you need have to do. It comes out of the box. You can just pretty much start writing the unit test without having to add any additional libraries or additional tools like that you do for Appium. So in terms of what can't Espresso do, it's native to Android, as I mentioned. As I said, you might need to have a different framework for iOS. Same issues like context switching between iOS and Android. The same problem as hermetic testing. It can definitely work. You can pass in different test data sets within your test without having to do any proxy or stuff. But you will need the code to be in a position where it's mockable. And that's pretty much with Espresso. Finally, with Detox, as I said, Detox is something that's built from the ground up to test React Native alone. So you can't write Android or iOS specific tests. You can write it for React Native and it would run the tests on both Android and iOS. So where does it work for you? So if your team is working extensively on just React Native apps, this is a great fit. It uses JavaScript, pretty straightforward to write something. And it has a gray box approach, even though it's not fully black box or fully white box, you can still have some sort of customization in terms of how you pass test data, how you mock some dependencies, and things like that, because you still have control over your code and it sits within your code. Tests are willing to support with debugging because that's a scenario where you can pretty much use detoxing. So how do you get started? So you might need to get started with just installing Detox as part of your toolset. And yeah, it's pretty much like you can use Jest to write tests. If you're coming from a web background, it might be quite easy for you to get started. And yeah, it has its own way of writing tests in terms of selectors and everything. But just like another web framework, so you won't feel very detached if you're coming from a web background. So in terms of installation, it's just adding Detox CLI globally, so you can run those tests. And some of the challenges you might come across when you're trying to use detox is a gray box test. It sits in the middle. It's not too bad. It's not too great as well. Setting up can be tedious, as I was mentioning, in terms of setup and debugging. It can be quite a bit of a setup when it comes to CI. But if you're using Expo, I think it might be quite easy in terms of setup, because it's Expo has been quite good in terms of managing your reactive apps. So if you're using that, there's a lot of tools out there to help you. And it's not as performant as compared to native test frameworks, because, again, as I said, this is something specifically built for React Native. It's not a native tool to actually test iOS and Android apps. But if you're not worried about the performant aspects of it, it works great on React Native, and you just need to realize that it only works on React Native. It's not built for any other tooling. But if you're a React Native shop and only deal with web apps and React Native apps, this is the framework for you. Just make sure what context and what problem you're solving, and try to pick the tool that might suit you the best. Because everything works. Everything can work in a production environment without any problems. Just that, like, your team should be open to adopting a tool like that, and you should be in a position to actually spend that time to actually upskill on it, or set it up to make sure it's running in the long term.
పైసలు పెట్టి వచ్చినా అనుకున్నాను. 10-15 వేలు పెట్టి కొత్త వచ్చినా అనుకున్నాను. 10 గంటలు చేసుకోవడానికి కష్టపడాలి. కష్టపడితే మంచి ఫలితం వస్తుంది. ఈ ఇల్లంపల్లితో ఇక్కడ ఈ కరెంట్ని వేరే పరిస్థితి ఉంటుంది. ఇల్లంపల్లి పోయిస్తావు.
Hey folks, I hope you're having a great time at Testflix. I'm having a wonderful time interacting and learning from each one. I'm Juhi Sabharwal. I manage developer relations at BrowserStack, where we've promised to keep community at forefront of everything we do. First up, thank you so much for making QA Leadership Summit a huge success. We're glad that you loved it and coming up with the new edition sometime in November. In the meantime, lots of other interesting events are planned for you, so do not forget to check them out, register and attend. Also launch BrowserStack Community of Champions. This is to recognize and celebrate thought leaders and practitioners in the space of QA who are working hard every day and pushing boundaries to build better products and beautiful experiences to their end users. If you're looking to learn, collaborate, share best practices, and network with such experts from across the globe, this is the place to be. Please do check out the details, apply for the program, and the team will get back to you. Also, don't forget to watch out for more interesting events and meetups by Test Drive, powered by BrowserStack. Also, if you want to know more or just say hi, don't hesitate to DM or reach out.
Our vision is to create India's largest transaction platform anchored on payments. To achieve our mission, we are working with millions of merchants across the country, working with thousands of financial service partners to create financial inclusion for 1 billion Indians.
What that means is that if every Indian has, say, 10 typical spends a day, PhonePe would be a part of each and every one of them. It could be just about ordering food, it could be about taking a cab, it could be about settling money with your roommate or maybe even sending money to family.
At PhonePe, we believe in an environment of positive disruption. This means that we use technology to increase the size of the pie for all stakeholders. We work with all our partners, with all our vendors and clients, and instead of disrupting anybody's profit pools through technology, we increase the overall market size so that everyone's got smiles on their face when they work with PhonePe.
Our most recently introduced product, Switch, is a great example of how we have actually differentiated and positively disrupted both the consumers as well as merchants. From a market perspective, it's truly differentiated. There actually exists no other product like Switch. So what we're effectively creating within PhonePe is another startup, or in other words, a startup within a startup. We have different businesses that are actually building their apps on the PhonePe platform. Building that is a massive, massive piece of work. And it's not just a single company or a product. It is basically a platform that is enabling multiple businesses to thrive and grow.
To drive this innovation, every employee at PhonePe has to act like an entrepreneur. We have to use data and technology as the tools by which we can actually craft the best and most elegant solutions that will allow a billion Indians to be able to leverage financial services.
So what we have at PhonePe is a bunch of folks enthused about their charter, making decisions on a day.
ఒక నిమిషం రా.